I'm Gina. I am the divisional lead for accountability, recruiting for accounting support and payroll in Sydney. So one of the interesting things that came out from our market trends of 2024 was that company culture is now number one. So it's now the number one thing that candidates are looking for to sort of stay, well, one of the potential factors for candidates to stay in their roles. This is really interesting as in the past, it was more working from home and flexibility that was number one, and company culture has now taken that spot. One of the reasons being is a lot of companies are now sort of transitioning to more of a 70% in the office, so more of that kind of 3 days in the office, 2 days from home, some even 4 days in the office, 1 day from home, which is really going to put a big impact on company culture. Whereas before it wouldn't have been as important for candidates if they were working remotely, and now they're coming into the office. They want to make sure that the people they're spending all their time with, that they get on with. I always say to my candidates, like you spend more time with the people at work than you do with your family most of the time. So you want to make sure it's your right people that you're going to be working with. This is another reason why we meet with both of our candidates and clients. So someone can be right for a position on paper, but whether it's the right culture for them is a completely different story, and whether the personalities work. So one of the main things, I would never work a role unless I've met with the client, and the same with a candidate, just so you can get to know their personality and make sure you're finding the right fit for both sides, because that's what is key for keeping your staff happy and keeping them for a long time. Another interesting thing that came out of the market trends was that flexible working conditions had 2 years on top and is now dropped to second, and being taken over obviously by company culture. This was interesting, but what I would say is to not think that flexible working conditions and working from home is now not as important. I think it is just as important. But interestingly enough, especially when speaking to candidates, it seems to be more expected now than it is desired. So people aren't kind of ranking it as high because they kind of take it for granted and I guess more expected. So when I'm registering candidates, it's still one of the main things that they're looking for is to have some work from home flexibility and some flexible working hours or flexible working arrangements. So my stress to clients would be, just because it's dropped down to second doesn't mean that it's less important in priorities. I think it's just mainly the fact that candidates are expecting it more than desiring it now. In order to attract the best talent as well, it's still very high on candidates lists in order to have some sort of flexibility, whether that's just 1 day or 2 days. I mean, as I said, the average is 3 days in, 2 from home, but that does fluctuate. If you're not offering that as a client to your staff, it does really make the pool of candidates a lot smaller, that you won't have access to the majority of the market. So it could mean that the general standard and level of people available to you would be lower than if you did offer even just 1 or 2 days. It's still very fair to be able to offer work from home once you've been trained, though. It's not expected from get-go. So I think once a candidate has proved themselves in the role, they would then look to have 1 to 2 days from home. Another thing to mention as well is on salaries. So in 2022 to 2023, that was where we experienced a real hike in the salaries. So there was more of a candidate shortage. So for example, a payroll officer, like a senior payroll officer, might have been worth 85 to 90 plus super. We were finding it was going to 100, 110, or 120 plus super for a senior payroll officer, because the demand was so high and that was increasing the salaries. I think now that has leveled out a little bit, so it's not as easy for a candidate to move and get an instant sort of 15, 20 grand pay rise, which is probably why it's a higher priority now for candidates when they are looking, because it's harder essentially for them to get.